Hello and welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. I'm Chuck Benoit with The Nature of Things, where we are realigning God, government, and natural law so that we might restore our American Republic. President Theodore Roosevelt said, the teaching of the Bible are so interwoven and entwined with our whole civic and social life that it would be literally, I do not mean figuratively, I mean literally impossible for us to figure to ourselves what that life would be if these teachings were removed. Well, we are getting a glimpse of that with the assassination attempts on not only on our president, but the actual assassination of Charlie Kirk, as well as rising anti-Semitism. Our nation is riddled with people groups that don't recognize the Bible for anything but hate, because the Bible defines their behavior as evil, and these groups champion the love of evil. I would postulate even that white supremacy, the term, is a code for Christian morality. White supremacy is the wealth and power that living within the biblical moral foundations allows, but extends to every ethnic group, every group that's willing to live by it. We find Christianity is a threat to immorality, sexual deviancy, and lawlessness, so it needs to be demonized. The Christian faith has resonated with every people group, skin color, language, and posterity it has ever interacted with. Christianity didn't start with white people either, but you might say that our nation did start with white people. But the white people of our nation, along with every ethnic group found in our nation, has been at the forefront of bringing the gospel message to all people groups here and around the world, fighting to the godless and the power hungry, frightening, I should say, to the godless and power hungry. Most people realize that the value of winning an election is quite temporary. What we on the right realize is that our daily behavior is far more impactful on our society for good than simply getting a political victory. That said, the people we elect have a responsibility to foster the values we've received from the Bible, from natural law as well. And so knowing how your representatives vote can give you a glimpse of who they are and whether they are sharing our values. So, do you know how your representatives vote? Okay, so with that, I'd like to bring in Mike Levine. Good morning, Mike. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Chuck. You okay?
Great, great. So the Republican Liberty Caucus is looking for a new state chairman. Where do you stand on this process, Mr. Levine?
Well, Chuck, I've been looking at this situation ever since our chairman emeritus, Bob White, announced that he would not be seeking reelection. And, Chuck, leadership is so important. And I'm going to say to you that it's the most valuable resource and probably the most scarce resource on the planet. And the Republican Liberty Caucus is a really important organization in Florida because it's well respected around the state. And the Republican Liberty Caucus takes the most constitutional perspective on legislation. And there are other great organizations in the state that do the same. But the Liberty Caucus has really been, over time, very consistent and very, consistent supporters of constitutional values, encapsulated in the word liberty itself, Chuck. So I'm looking at this situation, and the big deal for me is that I want to see the grassroots win. And what that means is that we restore our constitutional rights to the citizens of the state of Florida. Chuck, building a grassroots organization is in many ways harder than building a for-profit business, corporation, or whatever, however you want to describe it. because all of the components of the infrastructure are included, but the people that are involved in it are not that interested in the administrative organization as they are advocating for policies, which I understand that's the purpose of the organization, is to win on policy. But it goes back, Chuck, to the same old saying that you don't build a house on sand. And if you don't have the infrastructure in place, then you're literally building a house on sand, because every time you have a little change in leadership, everything that you've done over the last couple of years evaporates. And you and I are going to talk about that, when we get into maintaining and preserving the foundational documents and the core assets of these organizations. So, because I don't see anyone else doing it, Chuck, I'm running to be the chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida. Let's just say that.
There you go. There you go.
There you go.
That's breaking news here.
Yeah, to myself included.
Yeah, so
I'll tell you, Chuck, it's a ton of work. It's a ton of work. It's monumental how much work needs to be done, not just in the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, but in so many of the grassroots organizations around the state. And I hope that we'll be able to implement a lot of the things that I've outlined in the spreadsheet that I sent you. And I'm in favor of other organizations modeling and mirroring, and if you want to say grifting, off of what we will do at the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida when I'm elected to be its state chairman.
Super. Well, you did have quite an extensive outline of things that you'd like to get going with, but I think one of the most concerning issues for any organization that really wants to have an impact is financing. And we as an organization, the Republican Liberty Caucus, we do have dues, and there were other different like PACs and things that we were working with, but those PACs aren't really the RLC's PACs. And so the question is, what are we going to do with fundraising if you were to get your way?
Okay, well, let me just say something, Chuck. You talk about dues, right? At the Republican Liberty Caucus, the dues are $45 a year, and they're split three ways: national, state, and the local chapter. Chuck, that's $15. $15. You can't buy a steak for $15. And it's just that is a drop in the bucket when you talk about the work that is required in order to advocate for either candidates or issues across the state of Florida. It's nothing. It's nothing. When you start looking at just paying your internet service provider or your website host to house your website, those little administrative expenses that are unavoidable in this technological world today are nothing. So, yeah, financially, that's true. So, I need to get you back involved in this, Chuck, in this conversation a little bit, because it's really amazing, right? That, the organization comes out and says, we have X number of dollars in the bank and X number of liabilities, right? And expect to cover it on $15 per member at the state level, which is wholly inadequate. And if the organization doesn't have other fundraising methods, and just keep in mind that the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, the Constitution Day dinner, that is the big state fundraiser in most people's minds, is actually 100% carried out by the Brevard Caucus, the local chapter. So the state of Florida has none of that. And now that Chairman Emeritus Bob White is not the chairman of the state party anymore, he's much more interested in what's going on in Brevard, and much more interested in his Come Clean Florida program, and much more interested in his Liberty Rising political committee, which is wholly controlled, not even by the Republican Liberty Caucus of Brevard, But in the political committee is controlled by people that are completely separate from the Republican Liberty Caucus of Brevard. So I'm hoping that my friends at the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida will recognize that it is A1 priority to develop a political committee of its own that is owned by the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida. And anyone who argues against that is just saying that we're happy to have the rug pulled out from under us at any time and have nothing to say about it, Chuck.
Yeah, so that is one of your main points. If you were to be elected, you would like to start a Republican Liberty Caucus PC that is wholly owned and operated and managed by Republican Liberty Caucus board members or
The executive board, correct, Chuck. That's the end of that sentence. That is 100% owned and managed by the executive board of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida. That's true. A1. If you don't do that, you're not serious about this.
So you have some interesting fundraising ideas. You want to share some of those with us?
Yeah, I do, Chuck. Thank you for asking. And it's so interesting, Chuck. I mean, take a look at your buddies on the other side of the football, okay? And they have these, again, you can see the great Alan Ross and the great Wayne Twitty over in Brevard, coincidentally, who are doing so much work, and Bob White as well, doing so much work analyzing campaign finance and what's going on there, which is in your face, right? All the time. But they're analyzing, and just identifying and just basically threading the needle between the various political committees around the state that collectively raise hundreds of millions of dollars, only to find that the most vile political strategist, Anthony Pedicini, who is chummed up with his buddy Evan Power, who's the head of the Republican Party of Florida. And then you have Danny Perez, the leader of the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House, and of course, our friend Ben Albritton, the President of the Senate. Those four guys run, and Mr. Jones over there in Alachua too. They all run multiple political committees, exchanging back and forth between themselves hundreds of millions of dollars. And then you take this little grassroots effort we have where, we get $15 a member per year, right, to run our operations, right? And then you take a look at the political committees and the Republican Party of Florida, and look at the staff they have, Chuck. These kids come out of college, right? They get a political science degree. So they're trained in a university, and then they go to work for a political organization like the Republican Party of Florida or the Florida House Political Committee or the Florida Senate Political Committee, or they go to work for some guy like Anthony Pedicini. And, they look at the staffing they have. Look at the professional expertise they have. And over years, of course, with on-the-job training, they get sharper and sharper every year, while the grassroots do none of that. So my point to you is that we have to compensate grassroots activists for raising money. And our opponent, and it's so funny, Chuck, that we're talking about this, and everything we're talking about right now is inside the Republican Party. Ben Albritton's a Republican. Danny Perez is a Republican. Evan Powers is a Republican. I don't know what Anthony Pedicini is. I mean, he may or may not be a Republican, but I guarantee you he loves money, and he's a vicious campaigner. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. So my point is that here we sit, we are literally sitting ducks, fish in a fishbowl with no resources to defend ourselves, Chuck. And that has to change. And the way to do it is by compensating our members to raise money. And then we can get into the issue of whether we raise money for candidates or whether we raise money for issues, Chuck.
Right. You made this comment that people donate to issues not candidates necessarily, because the issues will be there long after the candidates. So that's an interesting point. And so you're suggesting that we pick some issues that are prescient, that are uh, possibly going to be dealt with in the 26 legislative session, and then go out and start knocking on some doors and looking for uh, contributions. Is that your idea there?
That definitely works, Chuck. But let's take it a step further. You know, candidates want the endorsement of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida. So my point to you would be that we have an issue and a candidate comes to us for our support. And my response to that candidate would be, okay, well, these are our issues. I want you to sign a pledge that says, when you're elected, you will sponsor legislation. And the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, to its credit, is so sophisticated. And of course, it's really nothing more than a resolution, Chuck. The same resolution that we write, that we're prohibited from writing in our RECs and other, we can write resolutions, long story short. So those the legislation associated with the issue is ready for bill drafting when you have the resolution written and wordsmithed and vetted and worked out. So my point would be that the candidate has to, in order to get the support of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, the candidate has to sign a pledge that says, when I'm elected, I'll carry this legislation. I will sponsor it and carry it. So that's what I'm saying there. And the point would be that when the candidate pledges to carry the legislation, then we will market that issue in the precincts within the candidate's district with the candidate's picture on it and telling voters in that district during campaign season that this candidate supports this issue. Therefore, the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida supports this candidate. Chuck?
There you go. Well, moving on, we do have a few other points we'd like to make. I think we've kind of talked about the financial part of things, but there are other assets that organizations like the RLC have, not simply financial, and the transfer of these assets from one leadership to another seems to be an important aspect of the long-term viability of that organization. Is there anything right now that's lacking in the RLC's transfer of assets, so to speak?
Well, I'm just going to tell you, Chuck, I think you and many of the viewers of our live stream have lived through transitions in power inside of these political organizations, whether it's your Republican Executive Committee or a grassroots organization or whatever it is. But like, for example, it's not uncommon that when a political movement decides that they want to take control of a political organization, then they go out and recruit a bunch of members, bring those members into the organization. And then when election of officers rolls around, they use this overwhelming, disinterested, frankly, population of new members to strip the organization of its previous leadership. And we've seen that done right here locally at the Lake County Republican REC, and we've seen it all over the state. So the point is that the people left inside the organization, the new members who, took over the leadership, and the previous members who have been running the organization for a long time are at odds. So what happens is the outgoing team they're in control. They have access to all of the paperwork, all of the money, all of the bank accounts, etc. So what they do is they abscond with all the resources of the organization, and the organization is left to rebuild itself. That's exactly what we're going through, Chuck, at the Republican Executive Committee here in Lake County, right? Taylor Yarkowski finds himself with a bare bones operation and a board of directors that, other than you and the state committee woman, Barb Price, really that has no experience running the organization and doesn't know where the tools are. They don't know where in their toolbox the tools are, they don't know what tools they have available to them. So it makes it really difficult for them. Okay. And of course, the people who have been disenfranchised by them just revel in watching them fail. So that's what happens inside a lot of these organizations. So the point is that if you don't have control, like for example, a simple membership list, Chuck, I know that you've it's been very difficult for you as a state committee man to get the membership list from the Lake County Republican Executive Committee or the Republican Party of Florida for that matter. So yes, membership lists have to be protected. Also, when you get into the public relations side of this, like for example, the Republican Liberty Caucus, we have an excellent public relations firm handling our public relations. On the other hand, if we were somehow to be separated from them one way or another, then we'd be starting from scratch. We would not have a media list. So for example, a local organization here in Lake County recently wrote a press release, and that's great. We have a press release, but we don't have a media list. So the press release is next to useless because we don't have a media list. And then within that very close-knit, unified organization, the people with the media list won't release the media list to their friends. So the importance of protecting the assets of these organizations from administration to administration cannot be left solely in the hands of the leadership of the people running the organization today. Because tomorrow there could be a very adversarial, confrontational relationship between the old leadership team and the new leadership team. And then you take control of the steering wheel and you're blind because you don't have any background information. I'm just going to give you another example, Chuck. When I was chairman of the Republican Executive Committee in Lake County, we had a list of property owners who would allow us to put 4x8 signs on their property. But that list has been gone for many election cycles. So today we're squandering, right? We got to start from scratch. And, organizations cannot be built, Chuck, when you start from scratch every 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years. You cannot build an organization on that. Those assets must be preserved, rock solid, preserved. And we can debate how you're going to do that. But if you leave those assets in the hands of a leadership team, I'm telling you that those assets will disappear when the leadership team transitions. I do not want that for the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida. I want the Republican Liberty Caucus to build on the shoulders of the previous leadership teams, Chuck, without exception. And I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, another point that we wanted to talk about, what that you suggested is needed for the RLC and as well as any other grassroots organization, is to establish a network of statewide influencers. You want to just kind of tell us what that would kind of look like?
Well, Chuck, it's so interesting too, because this comes down to membership effectively, right? And I'm saying to you, again, I wrote a letter to the executive board of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida telling them that if they're interested in implementing the things that you and I are talking about right now, as well as many of the other things on the spreadsheet that I sent you, that I would be willing to chair and lead that movement to establish these, what I consider to be indispensable, necessary provisions and systems for the organization. But anyone, like for example, let's just say that you're a person running to be the chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, and you say, I'm going to build membership. I'm going to open new chapters, and I'm going to build our membership roles and everything. But the fact is, Chuck, that if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And right now, what you've got are chapters across the state of Florida that are consistently made up of 15 or 20 retirees. Okay? Which is not bad. It's better than nothing. But the fact of the matter is, if we continue to recruit membership the way we always have, then that's what you're always going to get. So my point to you is this, Chuck. And again, you're a perfect example because we need producers. When I say producers, I mean people who can produce live streams like this one, like you do for us, you and me, every day. And then people from around every single county in the state will have a platform they can live stream to so that they can spend their time researching legislative issues in their cities, counties, the state, and come out and publicly broadcast what they have learned through their research, Chuck. That's point number one. So when you give that platform, you make that platform available to activists who are also influencers who want a platform to live stream on, but really don't know where to start on the production side of it, then you'll easily be able to get chapters in every single county. Point number one. The second point is, Chuck, that when you compensate people for fundraising, you can build that out however you want. There's a discussion about whether you raise funds for issues or candidates, but I don't care either way, whatever. When you compensate people for fundraising, well, then that will give people an incentive to be a member. So that will grow your membership, and it'll give your activists, your members, resources by which to get in their car and drive to the meetings, drive to the events with collateral material in their jacket pocket that explains the issue that you're advocating for and gives the recipient of that collateral material, that information, the education that you're providing them on the issue, a way to donate. And then every time that citizen donates, then the member is compensated, based on a percentage of the donation, and, the formula can be built out. But it has to be sufficient to get people's interest, right? I mean, if you give them, $5, that's probably not that interesting to them. So you have to build out a compensation. I'm a real estate broker, so I understand compensation models. And I'm saying to you that you've got to give the membership compensation that's worth it for them to get excited and enthusiastic about it. Because I'm telling you, Chuck, that college students can do this as a job, and they can make enough money to not have to have a job working at a fast food restaurant or whatever else they might do. So I believe that compensating our members for fundraising will spread like wildfire across the state, and people who would otherwise not have the resources to participate will now find participation to be the resource that allows them to fund their personal life and increase the quality of their life, because in fact, they're independent contractors advocating for issues, political issues, for compensation, Chuck. And I think so for example, let me just put a bow around this. So the person that wants to be the chairman of the party that says, I'm going to drive membership and we're going to do the same thing we've always done, we're just going to work harder at it, or whatever the case might be, that is a flawed model. That doesn't work. It won't work. We know it won't work because we've been doing it for, you can easily say decades, but you could say centuries, and it's not working. The establishment is kicking our, what? They have all the resources, and we have none. So what we're doing isn't working. And if we don't do it differently, Chuck, we will never make progress in the area of membership and influence, Chuck.
So Jason T has asked, how can I join the Republican Liberty Caucus? Now, they do have a website, RLC.
It's already working, Chuck. It's already working.
Yeah, there you go.
No. You tell Jason, I'll call him as soon as I'm done here, and I'll send him the application. Okay. I'll drive over to his business and sign him up.
Okay, well, there's
because that's another piece of it, right? This is called customer service, Chuck.
Okay, RLC.
Another big piece of the puzzle.
If I could just get this out, rlcfl.org is the website. There's a meeting tonight at the Mainstream Bank on Route 50 in Claremont. That meeting starts at 6:30, so you can swing by and check them out there. We are at the end of our half hour already. I know it's hard to imagine. But what we've been talking about is your ideas on how you could possibly level out the playing field between the grassroots and the establishment, trying to give the grassroots a little bit more room at the table, a little more elbow room at the table. Why don't you give us a short closing set of remarks there, Mike?
Chuck, it's my duty to give to my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and their children a country where freedom and liberty is protected. I can't do that by caring about nothing more than the spotlight being on me. We together must build sustainable organizations, institutions that keeps our legislature and our executive branch in check so that our kids never lose their freedom and their liberty. And what we're doing right now is not working. I'm going to suggest to you that what we're doing right now glorifies the leadership of these organizations and does not guarantee the sustenance of the organization. And for me, we all, in my opinion, have the responsibility of delivering a country and a state that guarantees the constitutional and biblical principles of freedom and liberty for our kids. And we have to do that. And if we don't do the things that you and I are talking about on this live stream today, Chuck, we will have failed in our responsibility to our posterity.
Well, thank you, Mike Levine, and thank you all for tuning into our twice weekly live stream. Please follow us on Facebook at Restoring Our American Republic. Check us out on YouTube at Restoring Our American Republic -ROAR. Like and share the program, please, please, please. And remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. So meantime, God bless you. God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.